I'll never forget the moment I stood at that altar, looking into Rachel's eyes, thinking this was going to be the happiest day of my life. The church was packed with over 200 guests, the afternoon sun streaming through the stained glass windows, casting colored shadows across her white dress. My hands were trembling as I held hers, and the pastor had just asked if anyone had any reason why we shouldn't be married. That's when I heard it, a voice from the back of the church. A small, shaky voice that said, "I do." Everyone turned around. I turned around. And there, standing in the doorway, was a woman I'd never seen before, holding the hand of a little boy who couldn't have been more than 7 years old. The woman looked terrified, her face pale, her eyes red like she'd been crying for hours. But it was the boy who caught my attention. He had Rachel's eyes. The exact same shade of green, the same shape, the same intensity. My heart stopped. Rachel's hand went limp in mine. I heard her gasp, a sound so broken it made my chest hurt. The pastor didn't know what to do. Nobody did. The church fell into this heavy, suffocating silence. You could hear people breathing, shifting in their seats, the rustle of programs being clutched too tightly. I looked at Rachel, searching her face for an explanation, for anything that would make sense of what was happening. But she wasn't looking at me. She was staring at that little boy like she'd seen a ghost. Her lips were moving, but no sound was coming out. The woman started walking down the aisle, slowly, like each step took everything she had. The little boy held onto her hand, looking around at all the fancy decorations, the flowers, the candles, completely unaware of the bomb his presence had just dropped on my wedding. When they got closer, I could see the resemblance even more clearly. It wasn't just the eyes. The boy had Rachel's nose, her chin, even the way his hair fell across his forehead. My mind was racing, trying to piece together a puzzle I didn't even know existed. Rachel finally found her voice. It came out as a whisper, but in that silent church, everyone heard it. She said, "Oliver," just that one word, the boy's name. And the way she said it, with so much pain and longing and guilt all mixed together, told me everything I needed to know. This was her son. Rachel had a son she'd never told me about. A son who, based on his age, she'd had before we even met. And somehow, in 3 years of dating and a year of engagement, she'd never once mentioned him. I felt like the ground was disappearing beneath my feet. My best man, Jake, put his hand on my shoulder, but I barely felt it. I was too focused on Rachel, watching her face crumble as tears started streaming down her cheeks. Her makeup, which had been so perfect just minutes ago, was already ruining. Black streaks ran down her face as she brought her shaking hands up to cover her mouth. She looked at me finally, and in her eyes I saw everything, the secret she'd been carrying. The fear, the shame, the desperate hope that somehow this moment would never come. The woman spoke then. Her voice was stronger now, filled with something that sounded like years of frustration finally breaking free. She said, "I'm sorry to do this here, Rachel, but you left me no choice. You haven't seen your son in 3 years. 3 years. You stopped answering my calls, stopped sending money, stopped being his mother. And then I see your engagement announcement in the paper, and I realize you're about to start a whole new life, a whole new family, while Oliver asks me every single day why his mommy doesn't love him anymore." I watched Rachel's knees buckle. Her bridesmaids rushed forward to catch her, but she pushed them away. She was sobbing now, these deep, wrenching sobs that echoed through the church. And I just stood there, frozen, trying to process what was happening. The guests were crying too. I could hear it spreading through the pews like a wave. Women dabbing at their eyes with tissues, men clearing their throats, trying to hold it together. My own mother was in the front row, her hand pressed to her chest, tears running down her face. Rachel tried to speak through her tears. "I was 17, she choked out. "I was just a kid myself. I didn't know how to be a mother. My parents, they were so ashamed. They made me give him to my Aunt Susan to raise. They said it was temporary, just until I finished school. But then it became easier to just let her keep him. And I'm so sorry, Oliver. I'm so sorry." She fell to her knees right there at the altar, still in her wedding dress, reaching out toward her son. But Oliver shrank back against his mother, against Susan, confused and scared by this crying woman in white. Susan's voice cracked as she continued. I've raised him as my own. I've loved him like he's mine. But he deserves to know his real mother. He deserves to have you in his life, Rachel, and this man, she gestured to me, he deserves to know the truth before he marries you. She wasn't being cruel. I could see that. She was being honest, raw, desperate. This wasn't about ruining a wedding. This was about a little boy who needed his mother. I looked down at Rachel, still on her knees, her dress pooling around her like melted snow. I thought about all our conversations about family, about children, about our future. She'd always been so enthusiastic about having kids someday, talking about names she liked, about the kind of parents we'd be. Never once did she mention she already was a parent. Never once did she trust me enough to tell me the biggest truth of her life. The pastor, bless him, was trying to figure out what to do. He suggested we move this to a private room, but Rachel shook her head. No, she said, her voice barely audible. They all came here for the truth. They came here for a wedding, for a celebration of love and honesty and commitment. They deserve to know who I really am. She looked up at me then, her eyes pleading. I was going to tell you, I swear I was. I just kept waiting for the right moment, and then so much time had passed that I didn't know how to bring it up anymore. I was terrified you'd leave me. I was terrified you'd look at me differently. I was terrified of becoming the person I was when I gave up my son. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to feel betrayed and lied to and deceived. And part of me did. But looking at her there, completely broken, watching her son look at her like she was a stranger, I felt something else too. I felt sadness. Deep, overwhelming sadness for everyone involved. For Oliver, who grew up without his mother. For Susan, who'd carried this burden alone. For Rachel, who'd been making terrible choices since she was 17. And for myself, for standing at an altar not knowing if I could marry someone who'd kept such a massive secret from me. My dad stood up from his seat. He's not an emotional man, never has been, but his voice was thick when he spoke. Son, he said, whatever you decide, we're behind you. But that little boy didn't choose any of this. He was right. Oliver was innocent in all of this. He was 7 years old, standing in a church full of crying strangers, watching his mother have a breakdown in a wedding dress. I did something then that surprised even myself. I walked down the steps of the altar and knelt in front of Oliver. His eyes went wide, looking at this tall man in a tuxedo getting down to his level. Hi, Oliver, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm Michael. I know this is all really confusing and scary, but I want you to know that none of this is your fault. You're a brave kid for coming here today. Oliver didn't say anything, just gripped Susan's hand tighter. But he didn't look away from me either. I turned to Susan. Thank you for loving him, I told her. Thank you for doing what needed to be done even when it was hard, especially today. Susan's face crumpled and she started crying too. I didn't want to ruin your wedding, she sobbed. But I've been trying to reach Rachel for 6 months. 6 months. I've left messages, sent letters, even showed up at her apartment, but she kept avoiding me. Oliver's asking questions I can't answer anymore. He found a picture of Rachel holding him as a baby, and he wanted to know why his mommy gave him away. Rachel had gotten to her feet, supported by her. Maid of honor, she looked at me with such desperate hope. Michael, please, I know I messed up. I know I should have told you, but I love you. I love you so much. Can we please talk about this? Can we please figure this out? Her voice broke on the last word. The church was full of people openly weeping now. I saw my Aunt Margaret, who'd helped plan this whole wedding, crying into my uncle's shoulder. I saw Rachel's college friends clutching each other. I saw my little cousin Emma, who was supposed to be the flower girl, looking absolutely traumatized. This was supposed to be a celebration, and it had turned into a scene of collective heartbreak. I stood up and faced everyone. My voice came out steadier than I expected. I think, I said, that Rachel and I need to talk, really talk. And I think Rachel and Oliver need to talk too. None of this can be resolved right now in front of all of you. But I want to say something. I paused, gathering my thoughts. Love isn't just about the good times. It's about seeing someone at their absolute worst, their most broken, their most flawed, and choosing what to do with that knowledge. Rachel made mistakes. Big ones, but she was 17 and scared, and I can't imagine the pain she's carried all these years. I looked at Rachel. I'm not saying I forgive you right now. I'm not saying we're getting married today. But I'm saying that I'm not walking away without at least trying to understand. Because the woman I fell in love with is still in there somewhere, and she deserves a chance to explain, to make things right, to be the mother Oliver deserves. The guests were hanging on every word. You could have heard a pin drop. Rachel walked down to where I stood with Oliver and Susan. She knelt in front of her son, careful not to get too close, respecting his space. Oliver, she said softly, I'm your mommy, and I've made so many mistakes. I left you when I shouldn't have, and I've missed watching you grow up. I've missed your birthdays and your first days of school and all the little moments that matter, and I'm so sorry. You didn't deserve that. You deserved a mother who was brave enough to fight for you, and I wasn't that person. But I want to be now. Oliver looked at Susan, who nodded encouragingly through her tears. Then he looked back at Rachel. Why did you leave? He asked, his voice so small and pure it broke my heart all over again. Rachel's tears fell faster. Because I was scared and young, and I made the wrong choice, but not loving you was never the reason. I've always loved you, Oliver. Every single day, even when I was too afraid to show it. The boy thought about this for a moment. And then he said something that made everyone in that church lose it completely. He said, Aunt Suzanne says everybody makes mistakes. She says what matters is if you try to fix them, out of the mouths of babes. This 7-year-old child was showing more wisdom and grace than most adults could manage. I made a decision then. Maybe it was crazy. Maybe it was the stupidest thing I'd ever done. Or maybe it was exactly what needed to happen. I turned to the pastor. Would you be willing to do something a little different? I asked. He looked confused but nodded. I turned to the guests. We're not getting married today, I announced. But I'd like to ask all of you to be witnesses to something else. I promise. I looked at Rachel, then at Oliver, then at Susan. I promise that I'm going to give this situation the time and attention it deserves. I promise that whatever happens between Rachel and me, I'm going to support her in being the mother Oliver needs. I promise that this little boy will know that he's not a secret to be ashamed of, but a person worthy of love and honesty. I turned to Rachel specifically, and I promise that I'm going to listen to your full story before I make any decisions. About our future, Rachel was crying so hard she could barely breathe, but she managed to nod. Through her tears, she made her own promise. I promise that I will never hide from my responsibilities again. I promise that I will work every day to earn back Oliver's trust and love. I promise that I will be honest with you, Michael, about everything, no matter how hard it is. And I promise that I will be the mother I should have been from the beginning. Susan spoke up then, her voice shaking but determined. I promise to support Rachel in rebuilding her relationship with Oliver. I've never wanted to keep them apart. I just wanted Oliver to know his mother wanted him. She looked at Rachel. I want that for both of you. And then Oliver, this incredible little boy who just had his world turned upside down, said, I promise to try. Just that. I promise to try, and somehow those 3 words carried more weight than any marriage vow could have. The pastor, wiping his own eyes, said, That I witness these promises before God and all gathered here. May you find the strength, grace, and wisdom to keep them. There wasn't a dry eye in the entire church. People were sobbing openly, holding on to each other, witnessing something that was both beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time. We didn't get married that day, but something more important happened. Truth came to light. A family that had been broken started the long, difficult process of healing, and I learned something about love that I never understood before. That sometimes the most loving thing you can do is pause, listen, and create space for redemption, even when it hurts. Rachel and I spent the next 6 months in intensive couples counseling. She told me everything about her parents' reaction to her pregnancy, about the shame and isolation she felt, about how giving up Oliver had left a hole in her heart she tried to fill with school, Work, relationships, anything that might make her forget. She told me about the guilt that ate at her every day and about how by the time she realized she wanted to be in Oliver's life, she'd convinced herself it was too late, that he was better off without her. We worked through it. Not easily. There were days I didn't think we'd make it. Days when the betrayal felt too big to overcome. But there were also days when I saw Rachel with Oliver, slowly, carefully building a relationship with him, and I saw the person she was becoming. Someone braver, someone more honest, someone willing to face her mistakes head-on. Oliver started staying with us every other weekend. Rachel read to him every night he was there. They went to therapy together. It was messy and complicated and sometimes painful, but it was real. Susan became a part of our extended family too, because that's what was best for Oliver. He needed all of us. 9 months after that altar scene, I proposed to Rachel again. This time, I did it in Susan's living room, with Oliver sitting right there, because he was part of this decision too. I asked him if he'd be okay with me marrying his mom, and he thought about it seriously before saying yes. We got married in a small ceremony with just close family and friends. Oliver was my best man. He wore a tiny tuxedo that matched mine, and when the pastor asked if anyone objected, Oliver grinned and said, "Not me." The guests laughed through their tears. That church scene didn't ruin my wedding day, it saved it. It saved us. Because better to know the truth at the altar than to build a marriage on secrets and lies. Better to face the hard things head-on than to let them fester in the darkness. And better to give people room to grow and change than to write them off for their past mistakes. That's what I learned standing in that church, watching my bride-to-be break down, watching a 7-year-old boy show us all what grace looks like. Sometimes the worst moment becomes the most important one. Sometimes secrets coming to light is exactly what everyone needs, even when it makes us all cry.